I'm Todd Jones, recovering from 30 years as a sports writer. Thanks for joining me as I sit down with some of the best sports writers of our time, who knew the greatest athletes and coaches and experienced firsthand some of the biggest sports moments of the past half century. We'll share stories behind the stories, some we've only told each other. Pull up a seat on Press Box Access. David Steele once said there are only three things you can count on in journalism: your standards, your integrity, your own credibility. David has proven that to be true in his nearly 40 years as a sports writer. His career has had a lot of twists and turns, but everywhere he's been, his talent and passion for the craft has shown through. We're going to cover a lot of ground in this episode. David's been a lot of places and has a lot of stories to tell. He's also an important voice on the topic of athlete activism, the subject of David's new book. We're lucky to hear from him. David, welcome to Press Box Access. I'm so happy that you've come into this tavern. I appreciate your time.
Hey, it's my pleasure. I'm really looking forward to this. I really enjoy everything that you guys have done so far. So I'm glad to join that club.
Well, thanks. It's quite a club. I don't know if the law should be informed about some of the rascals that are running around in this club, but hey, that's all good. And I always knew that David Steele was one of those good guys in the business. But I always had a lot of respect for you, David, professionally and personally, so it's great to have you here. Nearly 40 years in sports media. You were at the New York Post, Newsday, San Francisco Chronicle, the Baltimore Sun, as you mentioned, Sporting News, the National Sports Daily. You've written for the Undefeated, on and on and on. And I think what that shows is, A, how volatile the business has been over the years, but also it's a real testament to your talent and your tenacity, that you're still at it. You're still writing great stuff. You're still breaking news, and you're writing books. And you've got a new book that's out. It was always a choice, picking up the baton of athlete activism. It takes a look at the long tradition of activism by athletes in sports, and we're gonna talk a lot about that in the show. But I wanted to start early in your career. Let's just go back to actually your days as a student journalist at the University of Maryland in the mid '80s. You were there when Len Bias was playing basketball. And, for young people today, he might be sort of a name they remember, but Len Bias was the number one pick of the Boston Celtics in 1986, and then tragically died of cocaine intoxication. When you think about your days at Maryland, what do you remember about Len Bias, covering him as a student journalist?
One, he was a local guy. He was from, literally lived 10 minutes from campus. One of the area legends in high school, but still one of those players that, you knew what he could possibly be, once he got there, but he really had kind of only scratched the surface. And once he got there, you could see the flashes of it as a freshman. And then sophomore year was the year that they won the ACC tournament for the first time. And I think it was like 27 years, something like that. And he was the MVP, and he just completely blew up in the tournament. Went crazy in the championship game against Duke. And that's really when he kind of put his feet on the path toward becoming just a legend. And, you're a kid at the time as well. I was a year ahead of him. Scholastically, but you knew how great he could possibly be, and he just became just this magnetic presence all over campus, and you just knew that with all the great players that were at that had played for that school, that he was on path to maybe be the best of all time. I mean, better than the John Lucases and the Len Elmores and all those players. And he just kept getting better and better because we'd seen him compete against the Michael Jordans and all those kind of players. He beat Duke. He beat North Carolina. He was just he was the greatest player we had ever seen, and he just felt like he was one of us.
You mentioned magnetic on campus. Well, what was he like personally?
Everybody felt like they could approach him. He was really friendly to everybody. He felt like he was, it felt like he was sort of involved in what everybody does. He never really shied away or hesitated from talking to you. And again, you forget how young these guys are. So he's like 18, 19 years old, but still felt perfectly fine, talking, after games, in between games, going to practice. You'd see him somewhere in one of the dining halls or in the student union or something like that. People could talk to him. He didn't sort of detach himself from everybody else, although that's sort of the nature of college athletes. They're going to be removed from, and that's to a certain extent. They got their own dorm and their own training table and all those things. But he felt like he was still in the mix. It never felt at any point like, it all went to his head that he was this phenomenal player that was going to just take over, when he got to the NBA.
Yeah, and then he gets drafted number 1 overall.
Yeah, me and my friends had like a little draft party at one of our friends' apartments the day of the draft because we couldn't wait to see him pick.
Because you grew up in College Park, right?
I grew up in the D.C. area. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, well, then June 19th, 1986. Where were you, and what's your memory of hearing the news?
My mom was still living in an apartment in Tacoma Park, which is, again, right near, not that far from College Park. I was home for the summer because I graduated and I'd started working at what at the time was the St. Petersburg Independent, which is the evening paper. I'd come home to visit. My brother was taking summer school classes with a friend of ours. And I was literally just waking up that morning. And it was like I think it was like a Thursday morning. I was just waking up, so we're talking about like 8 o'clock in the morning, something like that. And my brother and his friend come busting into the apartment, said, literally, did you hear about Len Bias? And what we knew at the time was, he went up to Boston the day before to negotiate his Reebok contract and go meet with the organization and all these things. And so we're thinking, did he get his big contract already? Blah, 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 blah. And they said, he's dead. And we're like, what? I mean, to put myself back in that moment now, all these years later, it's hard to believe it's been almost 40 years. It just sounded so insane and so incongruous. It's like, dead. What do you mean dead? Like, what happened? What, car accident, plane crash, hit by a meteor? What are you talking about, dead? And so, of course, we turned on the TV, and not only the local news was like all over it at the hospital and stuff, but all the national news, all the national stations, they broke into regular programming to report this. And that just blew us away. And we're like, we're just like freaking out going on. And they were showing the shots at the hospital, which I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with, of them carrying his body out of the emergency room, covered by a sheet, this huge 6'8", just Olympian, Herculean body under a sheet. And they were, and it's hard to even think about it now. Like that, how did you talk about it? But seeing his teammates in the waiting room at the hospital just falling apart, just in tears. Keith Gatlin, I mean, he was, those two were just this incredible tandem, point guard and forward, throwing up the lobs to him, and he was just bawling and just had his hands up to his head, and the players were just in shock. And we just kept watching, trying to figure what happened. And they said heart attack. And that didn't make any sense either, because how could this guy's heart fail him? And we didn't know what to do. I mean, a bunch of us ended up going up to campus and just sort of wandering around. And there was 1 billion students wandering around, just numb. And this is the middle of the summer, so there was still a lot of students up there for classes and stuff. Right. Some of us went over to Cole Fieldhouse, which is still open. That was still the basketball facility at the time, and we just sat there staring at the court. Lefty Driesell did a little press conference in the lobby. He was in tears. He kept talking about, Leonard, I'll see you in heaven one day, and it was just unbelievable scene. And of course, there were TV cameras all over the place. There were TV trucks just circling all over the place nonstop, trying to pull people aside, trying to do talks and things like that. So we run out of things to think about. And we go home and we're watching all the nonstop coverage again. And I'll never forget on Channel 9, the CBS affiliate here in DC, and it was Gordon Peterson was the anchor. They come on with another special report, and all of a sudden the word cocaine comes out of his mouth. Said cocaine was found in his room or found it on the premises and at his dorm room. And that just put us all away. We were just done after that, because that just talk about things making absolutely no sense. We're like, how? What does that mean? And from then on, I mean, literally almost from that moment until today, it's just been this, he was pretty much from that moment on just going to be anchored into history, just cemented into this entire narrative about, loss and wasted opportunity and and the perils of drugs. It became a cautionary tale. A lot of people no longer found it tragic. They started mocking him. And of course, just the fact that you said that you were a graduate or a student at University of Maryland, that became a black mark against you. It tainted you for years and years and years after that, because that was the school that got Len Bias coked up and killed, after this incredible career, and cut his life and his career and his future short. What kind of university you guys have down there? So
you went to the funeral, right?
I went to the funeral, and there was a big memorial service there. Red Auerbach was there. They held up the jersey that he would have worn. I never remember, because he would have worn number 30. Jesse Jackson spoke. Lefty Driesell spoke. There were teammates there. And his mom spoke, Len Bias. And, a lot of us, even though we'd been around the team and covered them and stuff, we didn't really know the families that well. I'm sure that the people at the Post and the TV stations probably got to know the family, but we're students, so we knew him, basically. Mm-hmm. But so this is the first time we'd seen his mother, and she just gave this absolutely riveting speech about, how he was going to continue to live on, and the lessons that we were going to learn from him, and that, he was going to, speak to the youth, and she was never going to let down and never let people forget who he was and what he meant and what he died for. And it was just still to this day one of the most riveting speeches I'd ever seen. And
20 years later, you met up with his mother, mm-hmm. and you were a columnist at the Baltimore Sun, and you wrote a beautiful piece about it. When you reflect back on that meeting with his mother 20 years after her son's death, what do you recall?
I think what's always going to stick out to me is that I sat down with her in person. She was doing some stuff with some federal anti-drug organizations and things like that. Just to be able to sit and meet her face to face and talk to her about everything that she had done for 20 years, and to also just talk about, what that moment was like for her, how she was still driven to try to change people's lives and to put them back on the right path, and to learn a lesson from what happened. And one of the things that we really had to remember as well as part of this story is that a few years after Lenny died, her younger son, Jay, was shot to death in this crazy, some guy came up to him jealous about something. It was about some woman, and shot him in a mall nearby. And he was just on the cusp of, moving on in his basketball career, getting scholarship offers, things like that, again, really, really young. And that just sort of broke everybody. We're just like, how could, why would you do this to this family? So, a second time like this. So we talked a lot about that as well. And I think what stuck out for me most is that at the end of the conversation, after we'd done all the interviews, I turned off my recorder. I was getting ready to leave. And I told her, I've never had a chance to tell you how sorry I am for losing your two sons, especially Len, because I knew him. And she said, thank you so much. And I hugged her. And that's when I lost it. I just started bawling like crazy and I don't know how to this day, I don't know how she continues to give these speeches and meet these people and get involved personally with so many people's lives and not break down constantly herself. But I totally broke down when on that day and in that moment, because I just it was one of those times you just really couldn't hold back your feelings and just understand the humanity of what you're talking about, that they're more than, for me, they're always more than just a story and a byline and, a clip and things like that. I mean, this had become an intimate part of my life, from a really young age. And here I am 20 years later, grown man, well into my career, covering, sports full time, but living in a world that lost Len Bias in that way and being involved with the family and speaking to them face to face. And that was a lot for me that hit me really hard at that moment. And, I'm glad I got a chance to sort of express that to her. And I've had a chance to see her a few times since then and speak to her. She's still a great speaker. She still is very moved to do all these things. She's still motivated. She's still driven, and she still has the same goal. So,
So Len does live on in that way. I
absolutely.
mean, it's so horrible that he has to live on in that fashion to be an example of the dangers, but that's that's how he lives on.
Certainly in this particular case, I mean, not just me, but like I think everybody who was involved and engaged at that time and in that moment has really kind of felt a responsibility to sort of carry on his story, tell his story to the next generations, and make people understand his legacy. And you said it right. I mean, a lot of people just sort of know him as a name, and they don't know, the background of it. And the more the years go by, and the more the anniversaries get bigger and bigger, the more you feel compelled to say, this is what he was like. He wasn't just a name. He wasn't just a cautionary tale. He wasn't just somebody who, you've heard about and you've connected him with drugs, and, time to move on and let's stop talking about him, stop dragging us around like that. It's like, no, it's,
right.
His life and what happened to it is a defining moment for like that entire generation of people and of students and people in the metro area and of journalists who grew up at that time. And I think if you ask any of those who were in that class, they would tell you the same thing.
Yeah. Well, basketball put you in that situation and gave you an outlet to tell a very, very important story throughout the years. Basketball also put you in joyful situations too. And you've had the fortune of covering many, many Final Fours and NBA Finals. I mean, I think you covered the NBA as a beat for maybe a decade, 11 years.
So the first NBA beat I had was the Nets when they were still in New Jersey, when they were still, they were in one of their down periods. I mean, they've had ups and they've had downs. I mean, this was really in one of the down periods. But the head coach was Willis Reed. And it felt, again, pretty strange. And I'm guessing that probably most people who are in sports writing, have a moment like that where they're meeting somebody who they grew up, idolizing. Here you are covering them, and you sit to say, do you tell them? Do you sort of keep up that so-called objective, detached veneer? Or do you tell them? So I told him, I said, man, look, I was crazy Knicks fan and stuff. And of course, he laughed and he told him that. And then you sort of go about your business. And he was just burdened with just a horrible team and horrible management and things like that. So the team was pretty terrible for the couple of years that I covered them. When I later started covering the Knicks, I see Walt Frazier all the time. And again, this sort of tells you how long Walt Frazier has been doing the dipping and slipping and gliding and sliding thing. He was doing this, decades ago, back in the 90s. And so he was their main radio guy then. And so you literally saw him every day. And every once in a while, I had to kind of remind myself, it's like, this is a really good job to have. I'm covering the NBA. I'm covering a team that's sort of in the spotlight. It's in a major market and all. But also, I see Clyde Frazier all the time. Get to talk to him all the time about his life, about his career, about his views of the. And if you've ever talked to Clyde, he's a great, 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 great person to talk to about all these things, including about how bad and inept the Knicks are, for a pretty large majority of the time. So,
did it help you, David? Did it help you as a reporter? Did it help ground you to see the team that you're covering, as a journalist and not as a child who grew up rooting for that jersey?
Yeah, well, and that's what the distinction is. I mean, it puts everything into perspective. You every once in a while you think about how you viewed sports and you viewed athletes and you viewed your heroes when you were young. When you'd see them on TV or you see them at the ballpark or in the arena or the stadium, and they just seem bigger than life. But then when you're around them all the time, in every circumstance, including including the high moments, when they're winning and things are going great for them, you understand that they are people who are just exceptional at a particular thing. But they also have the same problems, the same stresses, and the same challenges, and the same doubts and things like that you or your family, or loved ones, or friends would have as well. They're just sort of in literally a different arena than you are. And this isn't just a TV show. This isn't just entertainment. They're a part of the world. Not just the entertainment world or the sports world or the hero world or they're not characters on a TV show. They're people. So, it does come into focus. Sometimes you have to remember it. You have to remind yourself, it's like, yeah, this is pretty, this is who they are. And you have to treat them that way. You have to talk to him that way. You have to interact with him that way, you know.
You were there every day as a beat reporter for the New York Daily News covering the Knicks from 92 to 95. And those are, you know, Patrick Ewing, Mason, John Starks, Pat Riley's the coach. What was it like being around that team every day? What made that team interesting to cover?
Well, they were really different from pretty much every other team. You know, any team that I covered, but also any other team that was in the league at the time, because the way they chose to play. A lot of that was, you know, who the personalities on the team were, but of course the team was constructed by Pat Riley and Dave Checketts and all those guys. But, you know, again, Pat Riley is somebody who you sort of saw from afar for a long, long time. You saw him around the Lakers. Every once in a while you cross paths with him if you're covering, you know, finals, or if the Lakers come to town or something like that. You see the Magics and Kareems and Worthies and people like that. And you sort of have it in your mind, oh, well, you know, you sort of fall for what was sort of portrayed as, you know, a Hollywood guy. His hair and his clothes, the way he carried himself, the fact that they were in Hollywood, the fact that they were around a player like Magic and things like that. And that's sort of the image that you have of him. Then he comes to New York and he coaches the Knicks, and you start to get to know him a little better, although he wasn't one to let people know him all that well. But you sort of understood his story and his background and his path and his rise and where he came from and what he did and who influenced him and what he was really like and what drove him as a coach. And he poured all those things into making the Knicks, again, a very unique team, because there was no Magic Johnson and James Worthy there. There was Patrick Ewing, and he found out a way to put Patrick in a situation like he had never been in, you know, previously in his Knicks years, where it was going to maximize what he did well and, you know, and build around him and his skills to become the champion that he was, you know, at Georgetown. And it's funny when you sort of look at it, the Georgetown teams and the Knicks teams that won were constructed pretty much the same way in a lot of ways. And you saw that Pat Riley put a finger on that and understood that. And so he emphasized the things that Charles Oakley did. He emphasized the things that Anthony Mason did. He emphasized the things that John Starks did. I mean, I don't know if there was another coach who would have, who would have identified somebody like John Starks and said, you're going to be one of the core players of a team that I think is going to win a championship. I mean, John Starks was just this guy who kind of bounced around the league. He bounced around a bunch of different colleges. He'd been in and out of places. He was real rough around the edges, you know. And Mace was the same way. That he was that kind of player, and yet these guys are centerpieces for a team that was contending for championships, who were hanging with the Bulls year after year, and were basically setting a tone that was different from what everybody else had said around the league for a long time. So you sort of see how all those pieces fit together. And obviously, they bumped and clashed with each other constantly. So you got to see that close.
All right. Well, give us a good bump and clash story.
I think maybe the funniest one was, at one point, and I wish I remember exactly what the circumstances were, but I think the term that was used all the time was insubordination. Pat suspended Anthony Mason just because they were butting heads all the time at practice, during games. Riley would want him to do one thing and Mason would want to do something else. And so and Mason would always come to us telling us about it. Tell us about the things that they're doing in practice. Like, oh, man, yeah. And it's so I could hear Mason's voice. Oh, he's trying to do this, trying to do that. He don't understand this. He don't understand that. I miss Mace so much. I literally wish I could talk to him just for catch up with him right now. But Pat Riley finally had it with them, suspend him for a few games, and so of course he talked to all the beat writers at one point, just complaining like crazy about what is making him do, and it's like he doesn't really want to win, he doesn't want to take advantage of me and everything. So they had a home game that very next night, and we're all at courtside, and the beat writers and all, as is the case a lot of times, had gotten really close. It was Cliff Brown and Curtis Bunn, and we were all together. They're courtside, and
Right.
Word gets out, word starts going up and down press row, said, Mace is at the game. So, what do you mean Mace is at the game? So he's suspended. What are you talking about? Mason was sitting in the upper deck with the fans. Yeah.
Really?
And the camera caught him at one point up there on the broadcast. And it showed on the screen inside the Garden. But
was he having a beer?
He just sitting around the van, just kicking back, lean back like a fan. Having a good old time. Yacking back and forth with the fans. Fans are loving it. They're posing with him, doing all the poses and everything.
He's up there in the insubordination section of the Garden.
And once we were all just dying. What just saying? This is just crazy. It's like, and they immediately cracked out on that. It's like, no, you cannot come to the game and sit in the stands while you're suspended. You cannot come into the arena at all. Okay, stay away. So of course, then he, after suspension, Edgy comes back and he's still talking and everything. And it's like those two probably just probably butted head more than any of them. And now the other funny thing about that team was that just because of the personalities and how volatile they were, I mean, they would snap and bite at each other all the time. But they would obviously take their real rage out against the other team. So maybe once every couple of weeks, the old runway in Madison Square Garden, which both teams exited the floor through the same path and then turned in a different direction to go to their locker rooms. Every once in a while, teams would be leaving the court for whatever, halftime, end of the game, end of, warm-ups or whatever, and a fight would break out. Somebody would pick a fight with somebody, it would either be among teammates or somebody with the other team, the two teams slugging it out or some imagined thing that went on or something. So, this happened at halftime of a game at one point, and one of the writers said, "Man, we're going to have a pool reporter in the runway one of these days."
Don Dunphy's on the PA calling it.
It was every night. Once upon a time, the Knicks came up with a promotion where every other arena says over 100 points, you get a free taco, you get a free, soda, you get a free beer, you get a free chicken sandwich, right, something like that. The Knicks came up with a promotion if they hold the other team under 85 points. That's when you get the pizza or the sandwich or something like that. So you get to the end of the game, and then the team's around, the other team is around 80, the Knicks are comfortably ahead. The fans are going nuts, saying, don't let them score again. So the Knicks are just out there mugging people, throwing them around, clubbing them, tripping. It was just a madhouse. And after a couple weeks, they had to stop the promotion. Say, okay, we can't do this anymore.
Yeah, city police department put out word. Hey, we need that. We need you to quit promoting defense. That's the thing. I mean, they were like no other team, in the league. I mean, they really kind of took, the whole Pistons thing, which is crazy in itself, the whole Bad Boys thing, and they really took it to another level. And there were people who were legitimately enraged as like, oh, they're destroying the league, and they're just, But it was unique. There was nobody else that was like that.
Science, science, science! Science, science! Hello, podcast fans. Want to get weird with us? Come check out the Mad Scientist Podcast. We're a weekly show that looks at the history, philosophy, and hard facts behind your biggest paranormal questions.
Did the government really pay for a psychic spy program?
Yes!
Is it true that surgery got its start in grave robbing?
Yes!
Can a roller coaster really kill you?
Legally, we can't say so for sure, but sometimes, yes! Join myself, Chris Cogswell, and my co-host, Marie Mayhew, as we examine the science, philosophy, and history behind the strange and unusual. All to discover what's possible and plausible versus what's, well, just made up. Check us out wherever you find your favorite podcasts. The Mad Scientist Podcast.
Well, speaking of taking it to another level, I'm going to take you a few years later. You're around the Golden State Warriors in December of '97 when Latrell Sprewell takes it to another level. and chokes his coach, PJ Carlesimo. First of all, were you there that day at practice?
I was. Yeah, I was.
Really?
No, we did not witness the actual choking, but yeah. Now, just to give you a little a background of it, that was PJ's first year as coach, and he came in with the sort of mandate from the organization that he was going to toughen these guys up, and that there was going to be no more, softness. Now, it's really interesting. Rick Adelman was the coach before that, and it's like literally the only blight on Rick Adelman's coaching career was having coached the Warriors, where there was this idea that he's a player's coach, he lets guys get away with everything, there's no discipline, blah blah blah. When it was just like, again, a weird mix of players. It was like post Chris Webber, and Tim Hardaway and Sprewell hated each other, and Chris Mullin was there and was like, what am I doing in this zoo? They had already traded Mitch Richmond, so they'd broken up the Run TMC, and again, they the whole Webber message, Chris Webber trade had gone down already. So it was pretty chaotic, and they fired Rick Adelman and hired PJ Carlesimo. It was right after he left the Trailblazers, where he had sort of the same reputation of he's the tough guy, he's the guy who's going to keep people in line, he's going to be the disciplinarian. So he and Sprewell didn't get along from day one. And after a while, Sprewell stopped talking publicly. Now, he would talk off the record every once in a while, very often to me. I don't know, we sort of established this rapport, and he would sort of tell me, this is what's going on, and this is why I can't put up with this guy, I can't deal with him, blah, blah, blah. So anyway, this particular afternoon in practice, we get there, and we're sort of standing out in the hallway for a particularly long time. And when they finally open the doors, we usually get to see the last few minutes of practice, but this time, practice is completely over. They're just shooting free throws. Like, okay, all right, it's going to be one of those days. And we, of course, do the quick head count. We don't see Sprewell at all. So we're thinking, wonder why Sprewell's not there. And then they call everybody over to talk to PJ, post practice, and he has the most obvious, noticeable red welts around his neck that everybody's ever seen. It's like right just on either side, just swole up scars, red. Everything right below that beard of his. That
it was just a shaving accident. He was shaving that
is
morning.
Literally what he said.
Come on, really?
I am not kidding. He joked and said, I did it shaving. And we all just rolled our eyes and said,
with a lawnmower.
Yeah. It's like, don't use a machete next time, okay? But we're all just like, all right, what's up? There's something going on. Then, we're sort of walking the hallways. We see the owner and his chief counsel in the hallways upstairs near the team office. We've never seen them at the facility. And we're like, all right, something's going on. So push comes in. Eventually we figure it out. It's like, oh, okay, there was like a serious incident, and they threw Sprewell out of here, and something crazy went on with him and PJ. And so late that night, and remember, it's late night California time, they call a press conference to announce that Sprewell has been suspended. And they said, why? They said physical attack on the head coach. And we're like, well, obviously he choked him. And and everything we understood at the time is that they were just going to do some sort of conduct detrimental to the team sort of announcement.
Insubordination.
Yeah, they wouldn't try to pull that. Exactly. Except that our old friend, your name you're familiar with, Peter Vesey, was about to write a huge story back in New York about it. And everyone else sort of, we all pretty much had it because we're on West Coast time, so we weren't going to be in position to really do anything with it for several hours, but he was getting ready to put it out there. So they hastily pull this together, and they bring PJ and the owner and the general manager, and they all sit together at this table and talk about how they're going to stand and make sure that they just stand up for the team, for the franchise, for discipline, and for order and all these other things. And basically for the next year, things were good. Of course, I think it was like maybe 2 days later was when David Stern suspended him for a year. And then the Warriors voided his contract, and Sprewell filed a grievance with the team, and then there were a bunch of hearings. including hearings in which Sprewell and PJ were sitting across from the table from each other with an arbitrator and with teammates there, with team lawyers there, with other executives there. And, of course, we're down in the lobby of this hotel waiting for all this to happen. But we're seeing all these people walking in and out of the building saying, are they really all going to be in the same room? They were all in the same room.
Wow.
It was really, really crazy. Now, and of course, in the middle of all this, Sprewell reaches out to me and says, let's talk. I want to tell you my side of the story. And I ended up getting the first print interview with him. And one of the local stations, a reporter named Cheryl Hurd, got the first on-air broadcast one-on-one with him. And both ended up sort of coming out at the same time, and I ended up on A1 of the Chronicle, my first A1 story ever, which was pretty cool.
Wow.
And
that's awesome.
And it also happened on the same day that that the Warriors voided his contract, and then later in the afternoon, or later that day, was when Stern suspended him. So it was pretty crazy. And one of the things that really kind of stood out for me, and this will be my little cautionary tale, like, kids, don't try this at home, because I still can't believe I did this at one point ever in my life, because they say, hey, don't talk on the phone, don't text while driving. I was driving to the arena for the game, knowing that all this had happened, that the suspension had happened and things like that. And Arn Tellem, Sprewell's agent, called me back while I was in the car. While I was speeding down 880 in Oakland on the way to the arena. And I'm like, it's traffic. I'm running late. I don't want to get to the arena late, but I got to talk to him. So I pulled out my pad and my pen, and I clasped the phone to my ear and my shoulder, and I had my left hand on the steering wheel, and I interviewed him and took notes with my right hand on the passenger seat. I was doing an interview and writing notes while driving down 880 on an interstate highway at 5 o'clock.
California State Patrol drives by.
Yeah, I'm sure I'm going to get retroactive license suspension, revocation.
But that's the kind of dedication that served you so well.
I'll go with that dedication. I'll go with that. Dedication, craziness, insanity. Total recklessness, lack of respect for human life, one of those things. Yeah, I actually did that. And once it was over and I sort of threw everything off, so I was like, let me regain control of the car. I said, God, I will never, ever, ever do that again. But I'm sure glad I got to talk to him for my story.
No, in all seriousness, David, that's the dedication that has made you one of the top journalists of your era and has carried you through all these different stops in your career. You covered so many different things besides basketball. You were there for the helmet catch. You were there for various Super Bowls, 2000 Olympics, on and on. But there was one more basketball story I wanted to ask you about, because you mentioned it once as a career highlight, and that is Game 6 of the NBA Finals in 1998 in Salt Lake City. Chicago Bulls, Utah Jazz, and Michael Jordan's last game with the Bulls. Why is that a career highlight, that particular game moment? I think
all of us knew that this could be his last game. This could be the end of an era. This could be a 6th championship. It could be another three-peat. I think the enormity of the moment was what sort of swallowed everybody up. And of course, just the circumstances of the game. The way that it built to the climax that it did, no matter how many times you watch it, you're still sort of, awestruck by it, because, one, Michael ended up scoring 45 points. Second, the final minute or so of that game, he just was above and beyond everything he had ever done at any other point in his career. He goes in for the basket, the layup. He strips Karl Malone, and then he brings it up. And everyone in the building, from writers to the players to this really rabid Salt Lake, Jazz crowd, was sort of, they were carried along in the moment like that. So it was impossible not to get carried along with it as well. And, every time I watch the replay of it, and you hear Bob Costas talking about it, it's like, okay, that's what it looked like on TV. And it was really dramatic, but it's nothing compared to what it felt like in the arena in that moment. And so you're all thinking, okay, wow, Michael's going to take the final shot. Imagine if he hits it. What's he going to do? How's he going to do it? What's he setting it up for? So he's dribbling. He does his little move. He pushes Brian Russell. He doesn't get called for it.
Oh, he pushes. Oh, okay.
He did, in fact, push. Yes, he did. And we all saw it at the time. So, and then he pulls up and hits the shot, and the place goes dead silent, and his arm is hanging in the air. And I know that for me, I was like, I don't know if I'll ever see anything this dramatic, this meaningful, this poetic ever again in my life. And talking to people afterwards, and I remember I was walking back to the hotel from the arena with Mark Heisler. And you know how great Mark Heisler is and what a name he is in basketball. It was such an honor to know him and an honor to have been sitting next to him during that game and during that entire sequence. And he said, yeah, did you feel a little choked up while watching that? And I was like, yeah, me too. Yeah, I did. I'm glad it wasn't just me. Because you did. You really kind of got caught in your throat as you watched all of that. And afterwards, when Michael Jordan's at the podium, and I think everybody sort of felt, everybody had that sense of, yes, this was the end. That was it. That was the capper. That was the exclamation point. And he felt that way too. Jerry Sloan kind of hinted at it as well, and prying something like that out of Jerry Sloan, as people know who've ever been around him and covered him, was no small thing and he just volunteered it to everybody because Jerry Sloan is maybe the most competitive person I've ever come across outside of maybe Michael. But everyone sort of understood that he had sort of orchestrated something truly special in a moment that most people can't rise to the occasion for. And he did it. And it's really the sort of thing that is the reason you fell in love with sports in the first place, because you don't see moments like that very often, but you crave them every single time you watch a game. Right. And this time he actually did it and you were witness to it. And somebody actually trusted you to describe it to your audience. And you somehow managed to trust yourself to describe it to the audience. And I literally can't remember what I wrote. I'd probably have to dig it up somewhere and find it. But, you feel the challenge to describe it in a way that, that elevates it to its proper place. Also knowing that the entire world watched it as well. So, and again, everybody was watching that. And that's where Michael was, and that's where the NBA was at that time. And so, yeah, nothing. I mean, I've seen a lot of dramatic things. Like you mentioned, the helmet catch was something that, you'll never forget. The moments you've seen at the Olympics, and I've had a few moments that have been really exciting and interesting and fun and dramatic. And, they've been upsets and, teams that have reached the peak when, they've sort of dealt with all the pressure and all. Still to this day, that's still number one for me, as a spectator, as a professional, and just as a person who loves watching basketball.
Well, those are the moments that make Michael Jordan special. Those are the moments that make any athlete, at that level special. So when you're a journalist, you remember those moments. But those moments also give athletes a platform, to use their platform to speak out for issues, about issues, civil rights, oppression. I wanted to ask you about your new book. It was always a choice. Picking up the baton of athlete activism. And it really seems to be an outgrowth of a previous book that you wrote with Tommy Smith. You wrote his autobiography, Silent Gesture. And Tommy Smith was, again, with John Carlos on the podium at the 68 Summer Olympics in Mexico City, 200-meter winner, and they raised their glove fist in protest. That's probably the most famous protest in sports history. And then now this book, kind of looks at the history of athlete activism, going back to like Paul Robeson, Ali, Jackie Robinson, Bill Russell, and so forth. Why has that topic been so interesting to you over the years?
I feel like I've just always cared about that kind of history. I mean, I was too young to actually remember the 1968 Olympics. I mean, I think I was 3 years old when that happened. But, that was always an image that I've lived with forever. It's one of the first ones that you sort of remember as you're growing up. seeing the photo everywhere and hearing people talk about it and understanding why it's a big deal. Your family, your friends, and just sort of as you watch sports and you sort of understand, what's happening. And, it's, again, going beyond just being a fan of one place or another, or one team or another, or one player or another. If you, I don't know if it's particularly growing up Black in the 70s, because I think it's probably that way for everybody Black growing up watching sports, and seeing, even if they can't put words to it, seeing the inequities and seeing the imbalances and seeing the injustices that even, again, that your favorite athletes and your favorite players and people like that are experiencing, and feeling that you can relate to them at a really, really basic level. I mean, growing up, I picked up on it really fast that all the quarterbacks were white. I picked up on it really fast that all the coaches, at every sport were white. When a single Black coach got hired somewhere, I understood what a big deal it was and why everybody I knew was celebrating it. I grew up watching Hank Aaron chase Babe Ruth, and the hate mail he got and the resistance that he got was always a part of the story. It was never just a baseball story, a fan story, wow, he's chasing a legend's record kind of story. And so that was sort of my understanding with the Olympics as well. It's like, the Olympics isn't just, who runs the fastest and who jumps the highest and things like that. It's like, it's a place where people are excelling in a society where they're not allowed to excel anywhere else. So, you knew about Jesse Owens, you knew about Wilma Rudolph, and you knew about Tommy Smith and John Carlos. So those are always been intrinsic parts of, of who I was and how I watched sports. And one of the things that it just felt natural once I started doing it professionally, writing about these things, that this was going to be a part of what I was going to follow and what I was going to write about. So, even when I was just writing a basketball game or covering a basketball or football or baseball beat or something like that, I was always going to be keenly aware of those things. And again, because you're talking to people and because you're, connecting with them on a human level, you understand those things as well. And they talk to you about those things and they express those to you. So it really ended up being kind of a natural outgrowth of that. As you sort of get to understand the world and everything, you reach out to those people who are making that sort of an impact. That's what led to me, talking to Tommy Smith and eventually co-writing his book. And it's sort of, the reason I maintained the connection with him, afterwards, constantly talking to him and all. And when the 50th anniversary of that protest came along, I did a big story for Sporting News and tied that in with what was, at that time, the biggest protest movement in sports since then, and that was Colin Kaepernick. Right. So when the protests in sports sort of surfaced again a couple of years ago after the George Floyd thing in Minneapolis, and players began to protest again. They began to boycott games. They began to lead to be part of the demonstrations, lead demonstrations, and make demands of leadership and things like that. I said, I think this, I think there's a way to put this all together and sort of draw a timeline and understand, sort of create an understanding of the continuum that goes back to the very beginning of protest through all these stories that we've been talking about all these years, and tie them into what's going on here and understand where they came from, how they evolved, what they developed, where they're going next, and also the people who have had those opportunities, like Tommy Smith and Jackie Robinson and Paul Robeson and those guys, and Colin Kaepernick, and chose not to do anything with them, which is why part of the book is about Michael Jordan and O.J. Simpson and Tiger Woods.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Because some guys weren't willing to use their platform. Right. It's a personal choice. Others had the courage to go out there. And I say courage because so many of them have paid a price.
Exactly. Exactly.
Look at Kaepernick. I mean, look at Ali, obviously. He's the most famous one for that. But Tommy Smith and John Carlos, 2 days after winning the gold medal, they were sent home.
Yeah.
From the Olympics. Kicked out of the Olympic Village and sent home.
Yeah.
And now they have a statue about him, rightfully so, at San Jose State. Yeah. And later in life, Ali was embraced by general society. But at the time, when they made their stands, that wasn't easy.
Yeah.
They were putting a lot on the line there.
Right.
You were around Kaepernick, in 2016 when that started. What was it like to be around Kaepernick on a daily basis when that was going on?
Oh, Kaepernick.
Because I think people forget that, at first he just didn't stand for it.
He just refused to stand for it. And, again, that has a long history as well. And that doesn't just even restrict it to just sports. There are a lot of people in the country, in this society, who have this relationship with the national anthem. And again, it sort of ties in with like the Tommy Smith stuff as well. But there's so many threads that sort of tie through this. Sort of the way people were so conflicted about Kaepernick even before he decided to make this choice. That there are people who saw his exploits on the field, as a runner, as a passer, as somebody who, again, played the position really, in most people's view, unconventionally. He doesn't have the traditional way of playing quarterback. And again, that rubs people the wrong way in a lot of cases. And so there's a lot of resentment toward him in that case. And a lot of people who did not want to give him credit for the things that he did for the 49ers during the years that they were winning. And that's, again, almost like a daily thing that we have to go through as recovering sports. But when he decided to do that, and when he was very clear about why he was doing it, just the resistance to wanting to hear that message at all was compounded by, we don't want to hear that from an athlete because you're just supposed to be there to play. You're supposed to be there just
to play.
Exactly.
Right.
You're there to entertain us. You're there to be our escape from quote unquote society. As if there's just no recognition of them being members of society and of sports reflecting society, not being some sort of separate entity from it. And, there are people who just could not navigate that and who just refused to deal with that. So, yeah, I was writing about that like constantly during the year because I was at Sporting News at that time. And there was just this, besides the constant backlash from the outside, there was this incredible backlash from within the NFL and within the rest of sort of the world of sports where, they either didn't feel like it was, anybody's place to speak out as an athlete about these things, or they were just told to, again, like you said, to shut up and play, or to not, bite the hand that feeds you, to be more grateful that you were quote unquote allowed to play these sports that you excel in so much. It's still like some sort of a gift that you're being allowed to play these sports on this stage. And so this was like a constant topic during that time, and it was something that players constantly grappled with. It was like locker room after locker room after locker room. Players were constantly either debating with themselves or having like an incredible internal conflict about it. And one of the reasons that I was really interested in writing the book was that it's like this was something that really needed to be captured, because otherwise it was just sort of a lot of thoughts that were sort of fragmented and sprayed all over the place and not really captured in one place and put into any sort of either societal or historical context.
Right. Well, I think it's very important, not just because of the history and putting it together, but I think it's important that a Black journalist has been able to do this for us, because your life experiences are much different than mine as a white man, and not that I can't try to understand or learn, but you have lived it and you understand where those athletes or coaches are coming from a much different point of view than my own. And so I'm so thankful that you have written this. I recommend that everybody, give it a read and it'll make you think. It was always a choice, picking up the baton of athlete activism. And, these aren't just games. This isn't just entertainment. This is huge financial industry, huge impact on culture. And I think, it's fun, and we've had some good laughs talking about some of the fun stuff. But there's also, a seriousness that needs to be taken into account. And I really appreciate you doing that, David, not just with these books that you've written, but also throughout your work, throughout your career.
I really appreciate it. And it really has been an honor and privilege, one, to talk to you about this and being able to get this out here and stuff, because it's rare, and I really, I'm not a natural. There's a reason I write and don't go on TV. This is not a natural thing for me, but I do feel really fortunate that I have had an opportunity to do this for a long time.
But one thing I read once where you said that as a journalist, there's only three things you can count on: your standards, your integrity, your own credibility. And that's been what you've been all about throughout your career. And I really enjoyed the stories, the seriousness, the emotion, the history, and some of the laughter too. We've had a good time recounting some of those tales from your career, David. It's been so nice to have you on as a guest.
Well, thank you very, very much for having me on.
Thanks for listening to Press Box Access. You can find us here with a new episode every other Wednesday. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to subscribe, follow us on Apple Podcasts, or on your favorite podcast app. We'd love for you to review us. 5 stars would be nice. Follow us on social media. Drop us an email at pressboxaccess@gmail.com. And be sure to spread the word. Everyone is welcome here. This has been a production of Evergreen Podcast. A special thank you to executive producers Michael D'Aloia and Gerardo Orlando, producer Bill Huffman, and our audio engineer, Nathan Corson. I'm your host, Todd Jones. It's closing time. Rock on.
Science, science, science! Science, science! Hello, podcast fans. Want to get weird with us? Come check out the Mad Scientist Podcast. We're a weekly show that looks at the history, philosophy, and hard facts behind your biggest paranormal questions.
Did the government really pay for a psychic spy program?
Yes!
Is it true that surgery got its start in grave robbing?
Yes!
Can a roller coaster really kill you?
Legally, we can't say so for sure, but sometimes, yes! Join myself, Chris Cogswell, and my co-host, Marie Mayhew, as we examine the science, philosophy, and history behind the strange and unusual. All to discover what's possible and plausible versus what's, well, just made up. Check us out wherever you find your favorite podcasts. The Mad Scientist Podcast.